The horizon was melting into a bruised shade of violet when Taya Redbird, a native woman of 20 years, stepped onto the lonely trail that led through the high plains, each of her breaths trembling like they might shatter if she exhaled too hard. The earth felt too big beneath her bare feet, too wide for someone who had never planned to face its vastness alone, yet she moved with a quiet dignity that even suffering could not strip from her bones. Her tribe's accusations still echoed behind her, unfair, untrue, but loud enough to chase her into the wilderness without a single belonging except the stubborn thrum of her heart. The wind nudged at her braids as if encouraging her forward, whispering questions she could not yet bear to answer, and far ahead, a faint lantern flickered like a promise she didn't trust but needed desperately, stirring a dangerous sense of curiosity. Clint McGraw, a cowboy of 30 years, swung his axe down onto a split of mesquite as though each strike might ease the ache the world had carved into him. The ranch surrounding his cabin lay quiet except for the restless song of evening crickets, and the glow of his lantern painted gold over the dust still clinging to his shoulders. He'd always been a man carved out of silence, steady, gentle, respected, but entirely unseen in ways that mattered. When the soft crunch of footsteps reached him, he turned sharply, expecting a stray horse or wandering coyote, not the sight of a young woman stepping timidly into the reach of his lantern's glow. Her eyes shimmered with exhaustion yet carried a fierce pride that made him straighten without meaning to. She looked as though she had walked through a storm made of people rather than rain, and something in Clint's chest tightened with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. Taya gathered her courage like fragile cloth and lifted her chin, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her desperation. I need shelter," she said, words small but steady, as if she feared they might disappear before reaching him. "If I stay out here tonight, I won't make it." She swallowed, then braced herself. "People will judge me for being alone with a man, so if you take me in, I need something more than kindness." Clint's brows knit in confusion, the axe lowering in his hand as she drew in a shaking breath, preparing to speak a truth heavier than either of them expected. When she finally whispered, "Can you make me your wife?" her voice cracked like thin ice underfoot, and Clint felt the entire night inhale with him, struck breathless by her impossible plea and the storm of shame she tried so desperately to hide. He didn't know how long he stood frozen, long enough to hear the wind fall silent around them, long enough to see the fear flicker through her eyes as she prepared for him to reject her. But instead, he stepped toward her slowly, like approaching a frightened doe. "Not like this," he murmured, voice rough with hesitation yet gentle as warm water on a wound. "Not because you think you have no other choice." Her shoulders sagged as though she expected anger, but Clint extended a steady hand. "But you can stay. Tonight, at least. You're safe here." He led her inside, giving her space, offering his blanket though his hands shook from nerves he didn't dare examine too closely. Taya settled beside the fire, its glow casting shimmering patterns across her tired face, but doubt gnawed at her expression as if she feared she had walked into yet another mistake. When she finally spoke of why she'd been cast out, of the lie, the accusation, the cruel glances from those she once trusted, Clint listened without the slightest flicker of judgment. Her voice wavered, but he didn't interrupt, didn't push, didn't offer empty pity. Instead, he poured her water, letting her speak at her pace, and the smallness of that gesture made her blink as though unsure how to accept kindness that didn't demand anything in return. Clint recognized the loneliness hidden beneath her story. He saw it because he carried his own quiet version of it, shaped by a life spent working hard enough to be respected yet never cared for deeply. The fire crackled between them like a heartbeat, as if urging something unspoken to form, and Taya wondered whether she ought to flee before her heart grew too curious about this man who seemed to see her more clearly in one night than others had in years. Dawn arrived with a pastel glow, and Taya stepped out to fetch water from the small well near the cabin. But the town's riders, coming back from an early supply run, spotted her immediately. Their whispering spread like wildfire, quick, cruel, sharp. She felt their stares prick against her skin like needles, reminding her of the exile she thought she'd left behind. By the time she returned to the cabin, her breath was short and her pride was fraying. Clint saw the shift in her eyes, saw the fear beneath her stoic expression, and something protective rose inside him with startling force. He had lived long enough in this town to recognize the weight of their judgment. It had pressed against him too, though never with the same venom they reserved for women like Taya. He tightened his jaw, a decision beginning to take shape, though he kept it locked in his chest for now, and he saddled his horse as if preparing for something he had not yet named. Life on the ranch settled into a gentle rhythm. Clint taught Taya how to gather eggs without startling the hens, how to mend a fence line with careful knots, how to read the moods of the horses by the flick of their ears. She offered help in return, quietly, cautiously, cooking meals, brushing dust from table corners, leaving small signs of gratitude scattered through the cabin. Their hands brushed at the water bucket one morning, and both froze, not in embarrassment but in a moment of soft electricity neither of them had expected. Clint kept his distance physically, but the awareness between them grew with every shared task. Taya's posture softened, her eyes warming, and Clint found himself smiling in ways he hadn't since boyhood. The air between them began to carry a tenderness neither dared name, until the day a shadow fell over the ranch gate, bringing danger in its saddle tracks. Dale Hargrove, a ranch hand Clint had known too long and trusted too little, pulled up with a nasty smirk curling his lip. His eyes landed on Taya with a sneer that made Clint's hands tighten at his sides. "Didn't know you were keeping strays, McGraw," Dale said, voice dripping with ugly amusement. The insult hit Taya like a thrown stone, and Clint stepped in front of her before she could flinch again. His voice remained calm but carried a steel that shut Dale's grin short. "You're on my land, Dale. Mind your words." Dale spat on the dust, warning Clint that keeping a native woman under his roof would ruin what little reputation he had left. Taya felt the old wounds in her chest reopen, shame rising like a tide she couldn't outrun, and by the time Dale rode off, she had already decided that she should pack her things before she destroyed anyone else's life. Clint found her gathering her belongings with shaky hands, determination etched into every line of her face. She told him she couldn't be the reason people turned against him, not after he'd shown her such unexpected kindness. He stepped forward and took her hands, not in a romantic gesture but in a grounding one, firm enough to steady her trembling. "You think you ruined anything?" he whispered. "Taya, you're the first thing that's made this place feel alive in years." Her breath caught, warmth blooming through her uncertainty, and for a moment, neither moved. But Clint didn't confess anything more, not yet. Instead, he asked her softly, "Walk with me." He nodded toward the tall oak tree on the hill, a place he rarely shared with anyone, and though fear tugged at her heart, something deeper, something curious and fragile, urged her to follow. Under the sprawling branches of the oak, with the world stretching wide and patient around them, Clint finally let the truth inside him rise. His voice was careful, each word chosen like a stone placed with purpose. "When you asked me to marry you that first night, I couldn't say yes because you were desperate." He paused, breath unsteady. "But now, I want to offer you something real. Not shelter. Not obligation. A home. With me." Taya's heart thudded painfully, the sincerity in his eyes wrapping around her like a warm blanket. He took a slow breath. "Taya Redbird, will you be my wife? Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I don't want to imagine this life without you in it." Her yes slipped out in a whisper, but it echoed through Clint like thunder, filling the space around them with a quiet, breathtaking certainty. Their wedding came 3 days later beneath a sky streaked with gold. Clint stood tall in his clean white shirt, nervous fingers tugging at the cuffs, while Taya wore a beaded hairpiece passed down from her mother, the only piece of home she hadn't lost. A preacher from town arrived, his voice steady and warm, while an elder from Taya's people, one who believed her innocence, offered a blessing with sage smoke that drifted like sacred breath into the evening air. Clint's hands trembled as he held hers, but his gaze never once strayed from her eyes. When he lifted her chin and kissed her, it was slow, reverent, filled with all the tenderness he hadn't yet found words for. The crowd standing around them murmured in surprise, in wonder, in reluctant admiration, and for the first time in a long time, the air around Taya felt free of judgment, as though even the wind had chosen to honor them. Their married life began with quiet gestures. Clint waking early to make her coffee even though he disliked the taste. Taya sewing a small cloth to wrap his lunch, fingers brushing tenderness into every stitch. They didn't rush affection. They let it bloom slowly, like the first greens sprouting through winter frost. Clint found himself brushing dust from her shoulders when she came in from the yard, marveling at how natural the touch felt. Taya found comfort in the sound of his boots on the wooden floor, steady and grounding like a heartbeat. Some nights, they sat on the porch in silence, letting the dusk settle around them, letting their breaths fall in unison as though learning each other's rhythms. Their connection deepened not with grand declarations but with soft glances, small touches, and whispered gratitude that filled the spaces between their days, until one evening when danger rode back into their world uninvited. Dale returned in a storm of drunken anger, gripping the reins with one hand and a pistol with the other. He shouted Clint's name like a curse, demanding he come out and face the consequences of choosing a tribal girl over decent folk. Clint stepped outside, placing himself between Dale and the doorway without hesitation. Taya's breath hitched, fear slicing through her, but before Clint could speak, she stepped forward. Her voice was calm, her posture tall, her dignity shining like the edge of a blade. She told Dale that no amount of hatred would undo the life she and Clint were building, that strength did not come from cruelty but from survival. Her courage disarmed Dale far more effectively than Clint's gun, or clenched fists, ever could. He backed down, grumbling threats that fell hollow against the iron resolve of the couple standing united before him, and Clint realized in that moment that Taya wasn't someone he had saved, she was someone who saved him too. When the dust settled and the danger rode off into the fading light, Clint turned to her with awe softening his entire face. He cupped her cheek gently, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had escaped. "You are my home," he whispered, voice thick with emotion he no longer bothered to hide. Taya leaned into him, heart pounding with a love that hadn't arrived suddenly but had grown steadily through tenderness, through trust, through every quiet moment they had fought to protect. They stood together as the prairie glowed with the fire of the setting sun, the world finally feeling small enough to hold them without crushing them. And in the hush that followed, they understood that their story wasn't one born of desperation. It was one born of resilience, courage, and the soft, unspoken desire to belong to someone who truly saw them. Life has a way of leading us toward people we never expected to meet, carrying us into homes we never believed we deserve. Taya and Clint's journey reminds us that sometimes love doesn't need to arrive loudly. It can grow through slow mornings, shared tasks, and small acts of grace that stitch two wounded souls together. Let their story whisper to the quiet parts of you, the parts that long for safety and tenderness. Remember that shelter is not merely a roof. It is a heart willing to hold yours without question. And somewhere, perhaps not far from where you stand now, a moment of gentle belonging may already be walking toward you, carrying its own breath of wonder, waiting to unfold just when you least expect it.